Want to welcome everybody back. So in our first discussion for the day, we were looking at three issues. One of them is trying to understand who the target audience of Paul is. That's point one. Number two was the Nicolaitans, and point three was the dating of the book of Hebrews. We have partially discussed point two, whether or not that was dealing with whatever doctrinal issues the Nicolaitans had. We didn't come to a complete resolution of that. And then we've moved on to number three, the dating of the book of Hebrews. So we had two dates given, which was 63 and 68. That was given yesterday. They were just taken from people's Bibles, various chronologies. So there's no one saying that they are correct. So to try to get a better grip of what the timing of this book may be, we went to the book. We went to chapter 10 from Hebrews, and we went to Matthew 24. And we've identified two verses from Matthew 24, verses 15 and 21. Verse 15 is AD 66, and verse 21 is AD 70. Most of us agreed with that. So then we looked at Hebrews chapter 10, and we had various verses given to us. Verse 9, which we decided wasn't correct. Verse 16 also wasn't correct. And then verse 30. And when we looked at verse 30, I suggested verse 27 might be a better verse. And if you're going to go to verse 27, then you could actually go to a range of verses. And we had a little bit of a conversation before, and maybe we would go to verse 25, right down to verse 31, perhaps. So in verse 27, we looked at the word adversaries. And that we spoke about with the people who do not flee, which is option A. So Tyler asked a question during the break about the question of who those adversaries was. Do you mind asking your question again and answering your own question, actually? But who's making what kind of application?
Ask the application question.
Yeah.
So my question did I think Parminder was making a application, or did he think that people who would point to the second coming are making an application? So basically, did Paul actually was he looking at the destruction of Jerusalem that was coming for this verse? And I think we agreed that he did know that it was coming at some point in the future, and that if that was the case, that he was seeing the destruction coming in the future, that those adversaries would not be just sinners in general. They would be the people who didn't flee, and the people who wouldn't flee are those who didn't believe the message of Christ and stayed there, would be representing the Old Testament of the Jewish church.
Thank you. So if verse 27 Hebrews 10:27, and we've said it's 25 to 31, is equivalent to Matthew 24, 15, and 21. So we've said that, and we know 66 and 70, that would be verse 15, and that would be verse 21. So Manuel gave us a 7-year period that he said was 63 to 67. And during the break, Bob reminded us that 66 to 70 actually isn't 4 years in reality. When you look carefully at that history, it's actually in the midst of that 7-year history. So it is actually 3.5 years, right in the middle. So the reason why that is important, do you remember what in the break what you said, Bob, about that?
That when it comes to the actual judgment, that the warning was meant to be heeded in the midst of that week of those last 7 years when Cestius came and surrounded Jerusalem, which was the Romans came and surrounded Jerusalem. And that's when those that were following the truth by God's Spirit were warned to flee, and they left. And then, yeah.
So I'm going to put the phrase too late as a question. When is it too late? Is it too late in 66 or is it too late in 70 if you haven't fled? You don't leave Jerusalem, but when is the date that it's too late?
66.
So Kathy says 66 is the date for too late. And I think that's what you said during the break, Bob, or?
Yes, but also when you say too late, the thing of it is it takes me back to Noah's time. He preached 120 years and it didn't make a difference. Even when God manifested his divine power and had all the animals just get on the ark the way they were supposed to, that didn't change anybody's mind. Nobody was on the fence. So either you heeded the warning in 66 and you fled. And so I think it's too late. I would say go by the 66.
Anyone else? Any thoughts? Or do anybody want to make a comment? So when we go back to Hebrews 10:25, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. So I think it was during the break. I don't think we spoke specifically at the end of the class. That day approaching. So technically, people here thought that would be AD 70. That's that destruction date. But by the time you get to 66, if 66 has come and gone, your doom is already sealed. So just as Gloria pointed out in the previous study, these days that are spoken about here in 10:16, we can put 10:9, Hebrews 8:8, Jeremiah. Even though it's 34, that's when it ends. We can go back to 31 because that's the actual event that's marked in the storyline that covenant change happens from the old to the new. It's really easy to mark that when you see what happens in the sanctuary service. And for those next 3.5 years, whatever they're doing is really just futile. It's a waste of time. And in fact, it carries on going on even past 34. Until you get to 70 where it's all destroyed. So if you take that model, because it's that 1 week, you see you get a very similar pattern here when it comes to the destruction of Jerusalem, that it's following the same thing. So even though 70 is the hard point, you can go to 66 and say that's when it really happens. Tyler.
So when you say that's when it really happens, you're saying if you're not going to get it in 66, if you're not going to flee right now, you're just not going to flee, and it's you've already sealed your fate because you're making your decision now. Is that what you mean by that?
Yes.
So you technically could, you're just not going to.
Yes.
Yep.
And after 66, if you're not gonna go, then you're done for, because all the Israelites, sorry, the Christians, they're all leaving around here, aren't they? Yeah. When you see Jerusalem, and then the withdrawal happens, that's the moment you can come. Others have left before, for sure, but this is your final moment. Is someone speaking, or?
Yeah, I had a question. This is Susan.
I said yes.
Happy Sabbath. What would be the point of the second 3.5 years then? It seems to me, just from how we study, that it would still have some progression there from 66 to 70. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but I was thinking about God's grace. And it seems to me that if there's a potential straggler, that God is leaving that room open. Because what would be the point of the second 3.5 years if their judgment was completely sealed at that point?
Yes, I think most people would agree with that. I agree with what you're saying. I think the way I had read Matthew 24 is once you get that opportunity to leave in that 3.5 years, the only people who are going to accept that opportunity are the people who have listened to Christ, have understood what's happening, because everybody's going to see what happens. They're all experiencing it. And depending on your perspective, you will read the signs very differently. If you're a disciple of Christ, if you're a Christian, you will read the sign as your moment to flee. But if you had rejected Christ, if you're not going to follow Christ, if you're part of group A, what will you see that withdrawal as indicating?
Yes, I agree with what your conclusions are. I just wondered if I was wrong about why the point of the 3.5 years following. So
I don't think you're wrong. It's just that once that event happens, everybody's going to misread that event. Not everybody. Everybody's going to read the event. The people who are going to end up being destroyed are misreading the event. And that event predicts their destruction, and they see it as predicting their freedom or their restoration or their victory, because they don't know why Rome has left. And in fact, when Rome leaves, the Israelites actually see this as their opportunity to attack them. Yes, and it's that weaponizes the Romans' mindset to actually come back and really deal with them.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Bob?
I have to mention that to me, there's an umbrella thought here. The whole reason why sin exists in the first place is because God gave us the power of choice. And God never violates our power of choice. And so when you look at that other period of time, it's God's way, I believe, of proving to the whole universe that when that people, God doesn't close people's probation. People close their own probation. And I think that these periods, after the warning is given until the actual judgment happens, is a time for God to vindicate his own character, that he's given us that power of choice, and that when people make up their mind, people, they close their own probation before God closes it.
Okay.
I have a question,
Who's this?
Victoria.
Hi, Victoria.
Hi. I was wondering, is 66 a waymark representing formalization? Because the 70 waymark is the line for closification. I mean, I'm just wondering, or 70 symbolize closification on the end of ancient Israel.
So Victoria's question is 66 the formalization? I guess, are you going to go to 34? Or you're not doing that?
Well, 34 is Sunday law.
Yeah, hence my question. Would you make that, are you saying that it would be Sunday law, formalization, close of probation? Is that what you're doing?
Oh, are you saying, so then would 34 be an increase? If I were to say that 34 would be an increase of knowledge?
I
Or
guess
is
the,
it, oh, I see. For 63 being increase, the 63 number being increase of knowledge.
I
And
didn't
it's-
mean to do that.
Okay,
But maybe it is.
okay.
My
Is that-
intention. I'm just trying to sketch out what I think you're saying. Are you saying
Yes,
something?
that's what I was seeing. Yeah.
Anybody has any comments on that? Don't know. I'll put 63, but a question here. I don't know the answer to that. I'd be reticent to commit myself, but I get the logic of that.
Okay, that's what I was just noticing, so I just want to ask the question. Thank you.
Why would 66 be a formalization?
Well, I see it as the point because from what I hear in the discussion, you're saying that this is the time. It almost sounds like a test, it almost sounds like the point in which people's decision is kind of made,
Mhm.
as far as if they're going to leave or not. And so that's kind of why I'm seeing that. I mean, because when we understand the repeating pattern is at that point where people are making their decision. So that's why I was thinking 66 is the formalization.
Thank you. Gloria?
I was looking more for progressive destruction, like if you times 7 times 360, you have 2520 then. So you have a miniature 2520 from 63 to 70. Yeah, 7 years. Yeah.
7 times.
360 equals 2520. Yeah.
Oh. Good. So, coming back to the timing. when Paul is writing the book of Hebrews, we know that 70 hasn't come yet. Yeah. Has 66 come? Has the event of 60, forget the year, has the event of 66 come as you read, say, from 1025 to 1031?
I don't think so. I think he passed away about.
Let's not worry about what year we think he passed away. If we know, so I'm not worried about the years per se. I'm just at the moment just looking at the event. Do we think the event of 66, as we understand it, has happened yet?
I think so.
So Olivine says yes, and you say no, and Kathy says no. So why you say no, Kathy?
I think he would have mentioned it.
So Kathy thinks Paul would have mentioned it.
I think he did.
Olivine says he has mentioned it.
But nobody followed.
And why do you think it's not?
He said 66 plus 20.
Speak a little bit louder, they won't hear you.
66 plus like their prediction that adversary or relation that the people like yeah, it's like it's the close observation for example, or like something.
Okay.
So if it had happened, everybody would have seen the event.
So just speak a little bit louder so that
So everybody would have been aware of the event if there was this of and that community video that put that in there.
so if 66 had happened, people would have been aware of it, and he would have made some statement about that. And Olivine says he's already mentioned it.
In the
So-
same verse,
Which verse?
the same verse 25.
So 25, he's already mentioned it. So I'll read the verse. Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Where's 66 mentioned there? How do you read that?
I'm looking at scene 70 approaching the day.
How do you know you're past 66 from verse 25?
I'm looking at it from the context of you're within the time period, as you mentioned before, 66 happens, everybody interprets it differently, but those who have understanding knows what it means. It means that the destruction of Jerusalem is near, so you're looking forward to that day. It is 70 is approaching. Therefore, you're speaking to the wise.
Okay. That wasn't a proof for me, at least. Tyler?
Understood.
I don't know. I don't have a strong thought, but it seems like if you treat it like you would the cross, and like we were saying before about that 3.5 years being time of grace, the real event, so to speak, or the event you really need to see is 66 or the cross. And that little bit of time extra is just some extra time, for those who need that time, maybe. And he's not even, is he really just talking about 66? Is my question. Is he saying when you see Jerusalem surrounded, that's going to be the time of destruction, and he doesn't even know that there's going to be a withdrawing, that he doesn't know that there's going to be two events, a withdrawal and then a complete destruction. And he's really actually just pointing to 66. That's my thought. I don't know though.
So we know that there's no time prophecy from no, it's not actually. We know there's no time prophecy from 31. It just says sometime in the future, something's going to happen. And if we go back to Matthew 24, and we had read 15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let them understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. Don't turn back. It's going to be hard days. That's verse 19. Pray it's not on the Sabbath, verse 20. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor shall ever be. How do we see in that there are, if you were looking forward, how would you see that they're two separate events?
You'd see the abomination standing there, you'd see the fleeing, and then you'd see the tribulation. So you would be able to see that difference.
When you're there, when you're experiencing it. But if you're looking, if you were just reading this 30 years into the future, would you have clarity that there are going to be these two separate events in the way it actually panned out?
Maybe not. I mean, that would be a lot harder. We have the 2020 of hindsight, which makes me feel like you might have just been seeing the surrounding and settling on that. I don't know, or like that would happen.
Because I think that's what your argument was.
That was, yeah, is that would be the hindsight. It's easier in hindsight and maybe not in the moment to know that.
Because the marker that's really being given is the 66 marker in verse 15. And it says, when you see that, then you flee. And the reality is you really can't flee. And then there's this pause, and then you have an opportunity to flee, but you have no idea that it's going to be a long time afterwards that the destruction happens, and it ends up being these two separate events, and you have this kind of mirroring of the time period in which the prophecy is actually being given, because it's being given in the midst of the week. And verse 15 takes you to the midst of that future week. And it's only afterwards that you realize there are two separate events, and we make all these, we draw some lessons from that. But the way it's written or the way it's prophesied, it doesn't give that clarity.
And there's a level of pace in those verses that's not a 3.5 year level of pace. It's like, there's going to be a lot of Sabbaths, there's going to be a lot of times you technically could flee, but it doesn't make it sound like that. It makes it sound like in a day almost.
Yes.
In a moment.
Because when you had time, you'd sell your property.
Yeah.
And it says, don't,
Parminder?
just 1 second, Manuel. It says, don't do anything. As soon as you see that thing, you need to flee. And I can imagine if you fled, you'd say, wow, the stock market went up and I lost all this money and I didn't sell my house. I could have made so much money if I'd just been prudent. So one moment, Manuel, just going to Kathy first. She had her hand up, and then we'll go to you.
Luke 21:20 gives more information.
So Luke 21 is the parallel passage to this. So we'll go to Luke 21. And you've taken us to verse 21.
20.
Oh, verse 20, 21:20. So I'll just read that. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. So if you're outside of Jerusalem, flee. If you're in Jerusalem, you need to depart, and nobody should be going into Jerusalem when you see the armies doing their work. Because when you see it, you know desolation is there, thereof is nigh, which means imminent. So it's all kind of portrayed as a singular event. Manuel.
Yes. The verse that Olivine used to show that this event, that the date in question is between 66 and 70, it actually proves that it has to be before that, since she mentions that Paul is addressing the wise, and the wise are outside of Jerusalem by the year 66. So whoever remains in the city it has no communication with Paul whatsoever, because they are doomed to destruction. So it has the book has to be written between 63 and 66.
Where does it say the wise?
She said
Oh,
that
okay.
Paul is addressing the wise, and I believe that's true, because after the year 66, there's no possible communication with the people that is trapped inside the city. They are like sealed for perdition already, for destruction.
But then if you go to destruction of Jerusalem, it is when they see Jerusalem surrounded, the disciples understood what the same point that you, Parminder, and Tyler are discussing. Looking ahead, you would have thought that it is one event, same thing that you're making. But we know historically that it is 66 that the disciples fled. They fled after seeing the sign, after the siege was lifted. That's when they fled to the cities that were nearby.
Yeah, I believe that.
So they didn't flee before, they fled after.
I believe that Paul in verse 25 is referring to the event of the seizure of Jerusalem, not the destruction. And that is for the disciples. The destruction is for the disobedient ones, and they're no longer here, but the man that is crying out loud that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, and they get fed up with him and put him in jail, and that's it.
Did anybody want to make a comment or respond?
Yeah, Mark 13:14 is the other parallel that also says, let them that read understand.
Let's go to Mark 13.
14. Yeah.
Mark 13, verse 14. But when you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let him that readeth Daniel understand, then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains.
And to understand was to exercise the mind.
Right.
Comprehend and to heed. And that wasn't spoken by Christ, that would have been spoken by Mark, added.
So in verse 24.
Mark,
Yep. It says, but
Okay.
after the tribulation, what would that tribulation have been understood as being? Let me drop
the tribulation, I think, was 70.
let me drop back to 19. For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of the creation, which God created unto this time, neither shall be. Except the Lord shorten those days, no flesh should be saved. What's 19 and 20 referring to? The affliction, the shortening of the affliction, and then in verse 24, but in those days after the tribulation, the sun shall be darkened.
It sounds like Jacob's time of trouble.
Jacob's time of trouble. Who was that, sorry? Victoria.
Well, yeah.
Thank you. So if you go to Ellen White's commentary on all of this, that after the tribulation, she's going to mark that as the 1260. The sun and moon darkening, can't remember the year, is it 33? 1833, should be clear on that. And she comments that when Jesus speaks about this prophecy, he does something. What does he do?
Are you talking about the mixing?
Yeah.
He weaves, was it 2 or 3 events together? The second coming, the destruction of Jerusalem, and was there one other one, or there's at least those 2, because they wouldn't have been able to take the seriousness of it, take it all in at once.
Yeah.
So Jesus is going to get these events and sort of meld them all together. So there's not 1,000 years difference between verse 24 and verse 14, say. It's all going to happen at the same time. And why does he do that? So Tyler says because they couldn't comprehend.
He says an act of mercy.
So Olivine says an act of mercy.
That Ellen White said in mercy to them. In her commentary, the same commentary.
Sure, yeah. Did I say it wrongly? It's an act of mercy.
I'm just saying what Ellen White said.
Yeah, I just said what you said. Because you didn't give us the book and the quote and the things. So I just said this is
The
what
controversy, destruction of Jerusalem. Sorry.
I was going to say. This is what Olivine said. That's right. It's all right. Olivine says that Ellen White said that it's in mercy. So I'm okay with that. So does it give more authority if Ellen White says it?
Probably in some person's mind.
In your mind? Are you some person?
Not in my mind.
Okay, so you did that for our benefit, for the weak of mind. That if Ellen White says it, we believe it, but you don't really.
For me, I view what we are doing. I have much confidence in what we are doing, and I believe that God's spirit and presence is with us. Therefore, our understanding will be sometimes different as to what Ellen White held.
Amen. It's just that you quoted her as an authority. I'm not saying that, but Ellen White is. Okay, so you said in mercy, and Tyler said.
I was trying to remember the Ellen White explanation that she gave, but
So she squishes them all together. Why?
I'm gonna go out on a limb to connect them together is what I'm gonna say.
To connect them together.
To prophetically tie the destruction of Jerusalem and the second coming together. I don't know. To make a link where you might not see a link before. Christ is doing that. I'm not saying.
Okay. So Christ is sort of doing some like fancy thing.
Extremely fancy.
Okay. And or they've been said in mercy. So just another question. Why don't they figure out there's a mistake on the 43 chart? Ellen White's going to say,
Put his hand there,
God put their hand there, and we're going to say
their fault.
their fault,
Mhm.
their ignorance, they're prejudiced. So what about the suggestion that the reason why Christ is going to meld all these things together is because the disciples cannot imagine a world that exists outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been prophesied, the temple, to exist right to the very end of this earth. And so when that gets destroyed, you know you're at the very end. So it's their prejudice, their preconceived ideas, their biases that Jesus is playing to and says, well, if you believe silly things, I'll explain it in a silly way or in the wrong way just to keep you happy. And then they have to work it all out. And it turns out that they've got it completely wrong. So if we're going to say that verse 14 is 66 and verse 24 is 1798 or 1833, depending on the tribulation, and then it says, we said the days shall be shortened.
I was talking about the 1260.
Yeah, so it's all talking about the 1260 and the affliction can't go on for 1260 years because all the Christians will be dead by then. You can't see any of that in this passage. It all seems to be happening as a singular event.
Yeah.
And then you'd have to work out what the fulfillment potentially might have looked like, because it never works out that way. So if we're going to do that with Matthew, and we didn't do all of that in the other passages, if you can span 1,000 years plus in one thought, surely you can span 3.5 years in a single thought, because that's the way it's written. Tyler.
Just jumping off of what you said, and maybe this is common knowledge and I didn't think about it, but can you unwind Ellen White's application of the 1260 there and say that that wasn't intended? That all God is talking about was all Christ is talking about in this moment is something very specific, and she's gonna bring the 1260 into a place that wasn't the initial intention.
So hopefully everybody got that point. This then becomes really difficult because it's so ingrained in us, because she's going to tell you why Jesus is doing that. And she's going to tell you that because she has this preconceived idea that you've got 1,000 years gap into these verses, and says therefore you have to explain that.
But then we would also have to go back and find the darkening of the day events that you're speaking about happening within that same time period of 66 to 70.
Sure. But my point, the only point I want to make is that any person just reading that who didn't have pre-knowledge would say this is all happening at the same time. That's I think the point that everyone's making there. Ellen White, 1,000 years later, is going to say, surely it couldn't have meant that. And the reason why it couldn't have meant that is because she's experienced the sun and the stars and the moon. And whenever you have an experience, you're always going to set that as your framework. Tyler.
No, I'm with you.
Bob.
It's just a side note, when you look at that we're talking about a judgment. And the wicked are in the graves for 1,000 years, and the next thing they know, they're awake again. So there's no time issue really when it comes to that. So it is, for them, it's all one event anyway. And yeah.
We know, assume you all know, that we're doing the very same thing that Ellen White does today. We're getting all the events that we're seeing, that we've experienced, and creating a storyline and taking all these verses, all of her quotes, all the Bible verses, and now we're making the application that we're the final generation. It's all happening for us. Because people have stood up amongst us and have looked at the signs of the times and have said, it means this. 2001 means this. A harbinger of the third woe. So we do exactly the same thing. That's why we feel so comfortable in all of that.
Mm.
But if you got someone off the street to join us and said, have a read of all these verses and tell us what it means, they'd say you just made a whole heap of things up, that it's not that easy to prove what you're saying. So I want to suggest that the way Matthew, Mark, and Luke are written, it seems to infer 30 years before the events happen that they seem to be written as singular events. That it's hard to tease out all of those things until you get into that history. And therefore, when Paul speaks about the day approaching, it seems to me that he's speaking about the day approaching when Rome is going to initiate the destruction of Jerusalem, because that's all anybody knows reading Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which I think would be 66. And if that were the case, then Hebrews would have been written before 66, not after 66.
Yeah.
It seems to me. But
And you already pointed out, with whether you're looking at Mark or Matthew or Luke, when it comes to that time period, that there's a huge urgency to, stop what you're doing and flee. Don't wait, don't delay, don't take care of other business first. Just get out of Dodge.
yes.
Yeah.
I have a question on the Parminder. It's
Is this go
it's
right?
when you say singular event, do you mean like one event happening sequentially after the other, or are you saying one event happening at that one time? Like, I mean, like, sorry, a collective of events happening at one time. I guess I'm just trying to have clarity on
Of
that.
course, there would have to be a sequence. First, Rome would have to surround Jerusalem, and then it would have to move to break down the walls, to bombard it, and then enter the city, and then destroy the temple. It would have to do so. There is a sequence to any kind of siege. But normally, if we were to talk about the siege of Vienna, we just say the siege of Vienna is a singular event. We refer to it in those terms as we do in any kind of a siege. And we know it's a process. It could take a year to bring down a city, but we'd call it the siege of something.
Okay, I get what you mean.
In that sense, I'm saying it seems to be written as a singular event, that it says when you see when you see Rome coming to destroy Jerusalem, you've only got a moment to escape. And then it says, once that destruction happens, there's going to be a really terrible time. And unless that terrible time was shortened, the whole of all Hebrews, all Israelites would just die. And all of that seems to be within their lifetime. If you were just to read it at face value, you would never imagine that between the destruction and that tribulation that's been spoken of, it's 2,000 years almost. It's not even 1260. It's much longer than 1260. It's like 1760, something like that. It's a really long period. You wouldn't see that in the verses.
Yeah, thank you.
Elder Parminder,
Yes, Manuel.
we can draw a parallel from this lecture and translate this into our own history right now, because year 66 looks to me like the final separation, the ones that received the mark of the beast and the ones that escaped the mark of the beast. And so that's gonna happen sometime in the near future.
So you're saying that's the final separation.
Yes.
So in the literal history, it's the final separation in Jerusalem. You know you're going to separate, and you're saying that's the final separation or the mark of the beast.
Yes.
And I guess you're going to then call it, I don't want to put words in your mouth, you're going to call this the great test?
Yes.
The good and the bad. For everybody, I've put that there. I'm just drawing out what Manuel said, and the way he's expressed that, it seems to me that he is tying that, even if he didn't intend to do it, he's tying it back to what Victoria has said or proposed. That's for her 66 is kind of looking like a formalization. She asked it as a question. She's not firm on that, but Manuel's taken a very similar thought to her and just said a little bit more. I think what we all can see clearly that there is a separation between the good and the bad there. That's clear. And if you're going to take 70 as a close of probation and 34, it's within the time period of what we'd expect. And if you make an application, is that where you get the separation of the good and the bad? And if you remember some of Ellen White's statements, it is at the loud cry, which is the formalization, that she says that families separate. That's when the separation happens. But that's not something that's strange. And we know that this person's been crying for 7 years as well. So I'll just put the loud cry. I put it in parentheses to say that we're not speculation, but we're just considering that thought. So I don't know if that's correct, Manuel, but I like that thought. It sounds like
I have a brief comment, but I'm almost afraid to say it.
Don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid. When you all were sharing about this, I just couldn't get over how 66 sounded like January 6th, the siege. And it was also a formalization. And it also was kind of a sign like the destruction, the first round. What was it? Cestius and then yes. It reminds me of that kind of, but I was afraid to say it because I don't think it lines up correctly, methodologically correct, but it sure does sound similar.
Is that right? 1-6?
Yep,
Yeah.
interesting.
I have an observation, if I can make one. It's Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Hi. So, in that context, going back to
the context so that we know which
the final separation.
Okay, here, what Manuel said, yes.
Yeah, connected to that, and I'm trying to connect it with the main point because we've been trying to figure out who the audience is, Paul's audience. So if it is A, then how is it Paul is speaking to them at this dispensation? If he's speaking to them, then they must have become part of the church or part of the world. So if you're talking about A being Seventh-day Adventism, is Paul speaking to them as Seventh-day Adventism, or they have become part of the world in this dispensation?
So if I can summarize what your question is, if the book was written here, then it's too late to speak to Group A. Is that what you've suggested?
Yes, and in that case, you have to see the two groups within the church. There's one group that is hearing, and there's one that is hard of hearing.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that what does that mean for you? Obviously you're saying that if it was written in this history, if it was written post 66, it has to be B.
Yes.
Okay. And what about if it's pre 66?
If it's pre-60s, it still has to be B, because institutionally the old church has been bypassed by 34 AD. So either way, Paul is speaking to the new church. He's speaking to the Jews. He's not speaking to them as part of the old system. They're being called into the new church. So I don't understand that. And connecting that also to the question of adversary, I think you have to see adversary in terms of the covenant. So if you break the terms of the covenant, it can be said you are adversary to the covenant. So, and you have to connect that also to Hebrews 6:6 to understand the falling away and crucify Christ again in this dispensation. So if you're not listening to Paul, then you are crucifying Christ again. You're breaking the new covenant.
Who do you mark the adversaries as being?
It's the people in the church,
Which one?
the new church.
So you see the adversaries as being the bad people in B.
The people who are dull of hearing in B, in the new movement, in the church.
Okay,
The warning is to them.
That's 1027.
That's 1027, before 1027, or this dispensation.
Because it says that it uses the word adversary in 1027.
Yes. So the warning is to the new church, to the people in Paul's church.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yes, I agree. And Elder Parminder, if you make a Venn diagram, you're gonna find that there's a group that is A, and there is a group B, but there is an intersection. Exactly. An intersection, that intersection right there is the people that are not either A nor B. They're like in the middle. They don't completely get out of A and go all the way to B, but they remain in that shader area right there. And I believe those are the adversaries.
And what's A?
Huh?
What's A?
They.
Who are A?
Oh,
A is
A is the SDA church, is the ancient Israel. We can label a bunch of because we're dealing with
adversaries.
Yes.
Where's Caiaphas?
Caiaphas is in A.
Caiaphas is here.
Yes.
And Caiaphas is not an adversary.
No.
What's Caiaphas?
Caiaphas is ancient Israel. It's not somebody that has accepted the doctrine of Christ, the mystery of godliness.
The people in this shaded area,
that people had an experience already. That people had already known the doctrine of uh, of the gospel of Christ, and
Right?
that is the people, is that these are people in the movement that
Let me
I might
stop,
be one of them, but the thing is that I can see that that is a group that is not,
let
it's
me
not
stop for a
fully,
moment.
it's like the warm, the lukewarms of
Let
Revelation 3.
me stop you for a moment.
Mhm.
Maybe we don't understand Venn diagrams in the same way, but that shaded group are people who are in A.
But they are also in B.
If they're in A, that means if they're also in B, that means they have accepted the gospel. And if they'd accepted the gospel, they wouldn't be in A, they'd be in B.
Not quite, because they go back. They do not fully go the whole, I mean, away from that area. They should be 100% on B or 100% on A, but not in that middle right there. Because
So the people in this middle, they're people in who are in A who have accepted the gospel in some shape or form.
yes, they have, but they do not advance. They admit it, spiritually speaking. And the other ones used to be, if you mark B as A prime, they used to be A, but now they are fully B. They are like Paul, for example, the disciples, and all of those. But there is this group here that accepted the gospel.
I think I've understood what you said. I understand your point.
Mhm. But they go back to the ceremonial laws and
I've
all
got
the.
that. I understand that. Again, maybe I don't understand Venn diagrams sufficiently, but I get the logic that you've said, but I'm not sure how it works with a Venn diagram. So I don't know how many of us agree that Hebrews is written before 66.
I agree.
Oh, yeah.
Finish that thought, sorry.
Oh, I know that. I finished.
That was it?
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think that he is writing it before. I agree with the idea that it all looks like one event. And I think that in that context, the adversaries have to be, and if you look at the chapter, the rest of chapter 10, it is all written in the form of the new covenant and the old covenant, the sanctuary system, and Christ's fulfillment of the sanctuary system. And then Paul comes to the point where he's writing these words we're talking about, and then about the adversaries. And I think it has to point just to ancient Israel as that system. I wouldn't necessarily get caught up in the individuals, but think about it as the entire system, that the old covenant or the sanctuary system, those still imbibing that system are the adversaries who are not going to heed the warning that Christ gave in Matthew 24, because they're not going to heed the warning, they don't give that credit. And so B are the people who are going to heed that warning, which is God's church. And so to me, it works pretty nicely just to say it that way.
We've spoken about temples. It was back here, first temple, second temple, etc. And we'd marked AD 70. I just want to take us back to the book of Galatians, chapter 4. So we'll begin in verse 21. And when we read this, I want us to keep a memory hook about Hebrews that we've been discussing, and see if you see any similar language here. So in Galatians 4:21, tell me, ye that desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? So I go to verse 19. My little children, of whom I travail in birth again until Christ be formed in you. Who is Paul speaking to? What's going to happen if I keep on going back and back? I don't want to end up reading all the verses. The last part of 18 says, I am present with you. I want to be, essentially, I want to be I want to be there with you, my little children of whom I travail in birth. Who's he talking to? A or B?
E.
Yeah, we'll clear this is B. Yeah, because it's also to the Church of Galatia. It's pretty straightforward that this is B. And it says, I desire to be present with you now and to change my voice, because he's saying something bad towards them. For I stand in doubt of you. Whatever experience you're having, I doubt your experience. So then verse 21, tell me, ye that desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? So I want us to see if this sounds very similar to the problem that is being addressed in the book of Hebrews. For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid and the other by a free woman. So there's freedom and bondage. And you're kind of familiar with this. Even if you weren't, where would he be going? You're my children. I'm standing in doubt of your present experience. Don't you know that there was bondage and freedom? What's he saying? Even if you don't know anything about Galatians, just from that. If someone just to tell you that, what would Paul be saying to the people? These are New Testament churchgoers. That there are two groups in the New Testament church, and he says, I stand in doubt of you. What's he worried about?
He's worried they're going towards the bondage, or that they're in bondage.
We could all see that. So he's saying, I'm worried about your experience, and I'm going to explain it through it says two women, one's bondage and one's free. So he's talking about their experience, bondage and freedom. Talks about the flesh, talks about the promise in verse 23, and it says, verse 24, which things are an allegory or a parable? For these are the two covenants. So we know this is Hebrews language. We dealt with that in Hebrews 10, the two covenants, one from Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, which is Agar. For this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, which answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, and is bondage, and is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. So you already have two Jerusalems, and it's the covenant. So it's not just the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem becomes a synonym or a symbol of kingdoms, if you like. So with two Jerusalems, there are two temples already in operation, in full swing. And without going into the intricacies, is Galatians written before Hebrews? Yeah, most of us know that. The book of Galatians is quite a while before the book of Hebrews. They're in that sequence. So we already know that the temple has been replaced long before the book of Hebrews was ever written. So when we talk about the replacement here of one of the two temples, we had 70, but 70 is actually wrong. It's not happening in 70. And this goes back to what Olivine was saying, that you can't disconnect the covenant with the temple, because if when Manuel said the reason you know the covenant changes in 31 is because what was the story that he gave? The rending of a part of the temple. So you know that the first and the second temple isn't in 70, it's when? It's in 31 as well. So Olivine says you can't separate the two, which is correct. You know that because the temple begins to get damaged right in that history. So I just wanted to point that out from the book of Galatians. I went in 4:21, but you'd go, or at least to 28. Galatians 4:21 to 28. And I'm only bringing that up to say that the issue of the temple and its change or its importance is a past event when you're dealing with the book of Hebrews. It's not current. It's not about the destruction that's about to come in the future. No one knows the date when it's about to happen. It's a past event that's already happened decades ago. So I wanted to just remind us of that. So I know Olivine and maybe others haven't agreed that it's pre-66, but I think it is pre-66. And
you are saying it's pre-66 or, oh, yes, I understand.
Hebrews, it was written before 66.
I understand.
Okay. You didn't say you agreed, but you understand. That's fine.
No, I don't have any issue.
Okay.
Remember, I said my Bible said.
Oh, yes. It wasn't anything that someone was going to crucify themselves on. So when is the persecution of the Jews going to happen? Let's put that here. By Nero, the persecution of the Jews. Christian Jews. Anybody know? I think it's 64.
Okay.
Yes, it's between 63 and 64.
So is the book of Hebrews written before Nero's persecution or after the persecution? So Bob says after. Where is Hebrews written?
Where is it?
Yeah. We'll let Bob do that one, this one.
In
You're not
Rome.
sure? No, they won't let you help.
Okay. Well, yeah, he was in Rome. So.
In Italy.
Yes.
Tells you in chapter 13, the very last verse.
Yeah.
So it says written from Italy, kind of. So whether or not he's in Rome when it's written, I don't know, but it's in Italy. And from 64, that's when the persecution of the Christian Jews really begins to happen. And it's going to kind of like, I don't know if it spreads out as a wave or anything, but if you live in Italy, you're not doing well. Especially if you're living in Rome, you're not doing well. There's a real time of tribulation that's going to happen now. So the question is Hebrews written before or after that? So Bob says after, and Tyler says before. And why before, Tyler?
I think I don't have a good reason, but I just feel like it's before he would have mentioned it if it was this thing that's just happening. But
Okay. Bob, why after?
I'm running what Paul wrote in Hebrews, and in my mind I'm tying to the Gospels, with Matthew and Luke and Mark and their comments, realizing that it says that this tribulation that's coming is worse than any tribulation we've ever seen to this point. And so I understand that my thinking is the Jews would have been, the Jewish Christians would have been getting persecuted by Nero, but the persecution of Nero isn't as bad as what's coming.
Okay.
That's my point.
Let's go to Hebrews 13. Verse 22. And I beseech you, suffer the word of exhortation, for I have written a letter unto you in few words. So we already know that who's the target audience. We say Hebrews. We don't actually know that because it doesn't say that to the Hebrews or anything. We just assume that, which is fine. We know we don't have any proof that it's written by Paul, but we assume that, which is fine. So I, Paul, have written a letter to you in few words to the Hebrews. No, tell me what verse 23 says, what means. Know ye that our brother Timothy is set at liberty, with whom, if he come shortly, I will see you. What does that mean in sort of simple English?
Was in prison?
Timothy's not a prisoner.
So I want I don't know if you're willing to do this, Elaine. Paraphrase the verse.
I can't get the second part of it, just that Timothy is set free or free. But it sounds like that Timothy's free to come to Rome. But I don't know if I have that backwards. Because if Timothy comes, Paul says, I'll see you.
Okay, so it says Timothy has been set free. Was he in prison? Have you got any evidence? Do we know any story that Timothy, it's pretty famous, that he was a prisoner somewhere?
Isn't it saying that Timothy is true in Christ? Because if you know Christ, Christ truly sets you free. So he's not under the law, because the law would condemn. We'd all be dead. I know I'd be dead if I was just under the law.
I don't think it means that in that sense. Often when we speak of liberty, we can use it in that context, but I think it's in the context of that he's actually free. And the question is, where's he being set free from and by whom?
Was he released from this similar the same jail that Paul was in?
Hi, Lena. So you're suggesting that Timothy has been set free from prison in Italy or Rome? Is that what you suggest?
Sorry, not Rome, Italy. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Tyler?
So in the last verse, I have it in a different color, and I'm not sure if it's there or not. Because I'm not familiar with the blue, but it's saying it's written by Timothy, like he's scribing this for Paul. Is that true, or is that like do you know anything about that?
Yep, it's not the Bible.
It's not Bible, that's an added thing. Okay.
Yeah.
That was my question.
Yeah, someone just added that.
But Paul does use other people to write for him.
Yes,
Yeah, I mean,
it does happen sometime. So let's do the last part of verse 23. If he comes soon to me, he will be with me when I see you. So basically, Paul and Timothy aren't together at the moment. And if Timothy comes to Paul, then both of them will come and visit whoever he's speaking to, the you.
Sorry, then basically they're not in prison at that time. Sorry.
So we know Timothy certainly isn't, and the indication is Paul isn't either. So I'll do it in a real paraphrase version. I want you to know that Timothy is out of prison. Whether or not it's prison or not, we don't know. That's where it's translated. If he comes to me soon, we will both come to see you. So we know that Timothy isn't with Paul at the moment, but the way it's written, Paul seems to have some freedom, and he's saying, I'm just going to hang around here in Italy, waiting for him. So would he be hanging around in Italy waiting for him if if Nero's persecution has begun?
That would be a little bit more limited.
Yeah. And then it says, they of Italy salute you, verse 24, which kind of, and there's no indication that they're in panic mode and there's, yeah, because this is the heart of the nation, it's the heart of the empire, Italy is, obviously Rome is. There doesn't seem to be any indication of distress. So, who's that?
It's Victoria. But in the verse 23, it says, if he come, well, this is King James Version, referring to Timothy, if he comes shortly. So it seems like Paul knows like something is about to happen. So it's like, if Timothy comes shortly, then, I will see you. But if he doesn't, then it's most likely something's going to happen and he won't. Or something, he's like, I don't know. I kind of get something from that if he comes shortly, because there's a reason why he's saying that.
Sure. What is he anticipating?
It seems to me, considering what's happening during that time, probably, it sounds like persecution, but I can be wrong. I don't know.
So we've marked persecution in 64, 66, and 70.
Mhm.
Who is the you that Paul is talking about?
Who is the you? The Hebrews. Is it the same? Is the you the same people that he's spoken of in all these other verses that we saw?
Yeah.
So people here are saying,
Is Paul with the you? Is Paul with them, or are they in the same place, or are they in prison, or what's going on?
I'll read it in a different version. Timothy has been let out of prison. I'm not sure if that's correct. And if he comes here, where I am, in a short time, he and I will come to you together. So whoever the you is, Paul isn't with them. Timothy isn't with Paul at the moment, but if Timothy joins Paul, then they'll make a journey together to come and visit the you, the people that the letter is being sent to.
As it pertains to time frame of when it is written as well, Parminder, wouldn't it then be suggesting Paul's first voyage to Rome, which is where he had more freedom?
And what year would that be?
Not sure now, not in my mind, but wouldn't it be taking us back to Acts 27?
Potentially, yes. So
That's my thought about isolating.
so
That's just my thought about isolating when it was written, because you're highlighting that Paul had more freedom in that time frame. And I think it could be substantiated from Ellen White's writings, The Life of Paul, she writes about the two periods of time that he went to Rome. First part, he had more freedom. So within that context.
So we've got a history here, which is, I'm going to call it house arrest. And Acts 27, someone tell me if I'm wrong. Acts 27 is that. He's put in house arrest. Then there's the trial. And then he's a free person. And then I think there's the second tour. And then I think he's captive. And then killed. So it's either in this period or in this period. Because this captivity, I think, is actually locked away with no access. So I think it's either this one or this one that Hebrews is written in. Have I drawn that out correctly, Olivine, that when you spoke about Acts 27? Acts
Yes,
27
in my mind, that's how I'm seeing it.
house arrest, trial, free.
Yes.
Then second tour. So I don't know where people think this is. I've always thought that it was here. So I'm just going to put me. This is where I think this is happening. That he's been set free. I'm not sure what Timothy being released means. Either he's gone to prison, which I haven't seen any record of, or he's been free of some kind of obligation of taking care of Paul or doing something. So he's been set free, doing some work, and if he returns back, then they're both going to go together to these bad people and help them.
I think when you read, if you go to the life of Paul Ellen White, I believe that you'll see that's the context in which she writes it. The way that you just said it.
Okay.
What is your estimated time then?
Okay, so I'll do that I'll do the estimated time. So Olivine says that the way I've expressed it is kind of what Ellen White says. The reason why I think it's number 2, not number 1, is because when Timothy comes, Paul can go. And in number 1, he's under house arrest. He can't go anywhere. So he's not a free person. And the only free place where he would be in Rome, I think, would be at number 2.
Acts 28:30 says he had his own house, which he used.
Yes, so that's why if you've got the verse for that.
Yeah, Acts 28:30.
Acts 28:30. So that's where I've put the house arrest.
No, not
Oh,
that's the free time.
are you sure?
And Paul throughout 2 whole years in his own private house. Or you said that?
I think that's house arrest.
He had to pay for his own house?
He was allowed to pay for his own house, if I can put it that way. Otherwise, I think they gave him a lot of grace because they could have just locked him up like a normal prisoner before he's going to see Nero, before he goes to trial. Because when you say, I appeal to Caesar, and they say, okay, we'll ship you to Rome, and then you can put your case directly to Caesar. You don't go and see him next week. You don't know when you're going to ever see Caesar. And so you remain a prisoner until your trial date comes. And because Paul had been gracious in Acts 27, when he gets to Italy, he's afforded a lot of privileges that normal prisoners aren't afforded. And I think that's where Acts 28, I could be wrong on that.
Okay, so he was still then in the house arrest, even though it's his own house.
I
He
think.
still was, I think, I read, Ellen White said he was, the Roman soldier was still cuffed in,
Yes.
even though
He was in,
Yeah.
he was arrested.
So
Okay,
I'm just going to go on 1323 when Timothy is set free. If you go back to the life of Paul, what I understood that to be was Paul had set Timothy free. It wasn't about imprisonment. But you can confirm that. Olivine says that she recalls that that's the case. So if all that's correct, I'm suggesting that the book of Hebrews is, I've got no proof of it, but it's pre-64. So I think Hebrews is written this time. Whether it's literally 63 or not, but it's pre-64. And so it's in that time period of very early 60s. And it so happened that Penny's Bible said 63. So I'm not saying it is 63, but I want to mark that it's pre-64. And maybe when you look at this, you could determine better when that would be. If it's at number 2, that date you can fix pretty easily, I think. Might be 61, 62. So
And that's it, that they, like, if you search for Paul's first voyage, Acts 27 would be placed around 60 to 61. Thereabout.
This is 60 to 61.
Yeah.
And
I think this is a 3-year time span, 3 to 3.5 year time span.
Okay. From beginning to end.
From the point that you're marking 60, his voyage to where he's having his freedom.
Okay.
That history.
So we've marked the time frame of when the book's written. It's before the destruction. We've clarified most things now. Maybe we're not all in total agreement with respect to those people who do abominations, who they are. That's 1027. Let me find that 1027 if I can. Those the adversaries, sorry, the adversaries. Maybe we're not all in agreement with who the adversaries are, but I think we're all in agreement that should be contextualized to the present day history. If we're all okay with that. And so we didn't finalize on the Nicolaitans. Maybe we need to just finish that off if we get an opportunity. So number 1, any other verses that we can come up with outside of the ones we already looked at?
What about verse 29?
Of what chapter?
Same chapter 10.
(1029), but will not. Oh, sorry, doing King James. 1029. Of how much sorer punishment suppose ye shall he be thought worthy, who has trodden underfoot the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant wherewith he was sanctified an unholy thing, and hath done despite unto the Spirit of grace. So that's in comparison to Moses, 28. He that despiseth Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. of how much sore a punishment suppose ye shall he be who shall he be thought worthy who hath trodden under foot the Son of God and hath counted the blood of the covenant wherewith he was sanctified an unholy thing. So Hebrews, so this is number 1, and we've got Hebrews 10:29. Tell us, Olivine, why does this show? I'm assuming that you're going to say it's B.
Because I'm assuming same old covenant, new covenant. That's what he makes reference to the old covenant and compares though the experience of those under the old covenant, they did not escape the judgment. So how much more would you who are under the new covenant? So you have greater light. You are in, I'm going to say, even greater breach than those who were under the first covenant. He's comparing and contrasting old covenant with new covenant in my mind.
What I thought you were going to say in 29 is when it says and hath, so this is the person, the target audience who is doing something bad, and you hath, I've added the word you hath counted the blood of the covenant wherewith you were sanctified. Is that a,
yes,
phrase?
Yes, yes, that's it.
So it says that you were sanctified, and the only people that were ever sanctified by the blood of the covenant were in Hebrews 10:29, and it says the people who were, let me redo it. Of how much sore a punishment suppose ye shall be thought worthy who hath trodden under foot the Son of God. So you've trodden down Christ, and you've counted the blood of the covenant as worthless, wherewith you were sanctified. So the only people that are sanctified are the recipients of the blood of Christ. It's not Christ himself. And you've considered it an holy thing, etc. So when it says you were sanctified, that to me says it's talking about B. Because ancient Israel were never sanctified by Christ's blood because they never accepted it. So they never had a past and present experience. Past was good, they started on a good trail, and now they're bad because now they're treading Christ underfoot. So to me, 1029 seems a definitive proof text that it's B. Are you okay with that? I know it's slightly different to what you said, Olivine.
Yes, it is, but that's the point that I was picking up on. The line that you picked up on, that was what I was saying, that to me references those who are sanctified under the new covenant. So it would be referencing B.
Lovely. So I don't know if we all remember what Mary said, because Mary, I don't know how firm we were, but if I say that she disagreed with us about who the adversaries were, because earlier we were saying the adversaries were A, but she said she thinks the adversaries are B. And if you go with 1029 as being B, when you go to verse 28, because verse 28 and 29 are together, he that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. So it talks about dying without mercy. That's in clear reference, 28 and 29 is in clear reference to 27. So therefore you'd get 27 also being B, which is what Mary had pointed out. So then if we all see that, maybe it's you need to read it and fully absorb it. But I just wanted to add that in because she mentioned that, and we didn't sort of agree with her in any detail sense, or at least I didn't. I just let her make a point. Have I expressed that correctly, Mary?
Yes.
Excellent. So I want to take us, because there are some other ones, a couple that I saw. I want to take us to Hebrews 4. Oops, wrong way. Hebrews 4:1. Let us therefore fear, lest the promise being left us of entering into the rest, any of you should come short of it. For unto us was the gospel preached, as well as unto them. But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that hear it. So verse 2, there are two groups. Who are the two groups in verse 4? Sorry, verse 2. Hebrews 4, verse 1 and 2. So in verse 2, there's two groups. Who are they?
Us and them. A and B.
Go ahead.
The ones that listed the gospel, ones that didn't.
The ones that listened to the Gospels and the one that didn't. Tyler?
Yeah.
Same thing. So I'm going to call that A and B. A and B did not listen, and B did listen. The New Testament church listened. That's what makes you enter the New Testament church. For unto us was the gospel preached, as well as unto them. So two people got the gospel, but the word preached did not profit them, it profited us. And it tells you why. And so in verse 4 it says, let us therefore fear, lest the promise being left us of entering into the rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. So who are the you in verse 1? Okay, so I'm going to do two groups. Let me do it that way. There are two groups. Who are the two groups in 1?
There's that entering his rest.
Let's do A or B.
A would be not entering.
Are you explaining? Just give me the letter. Who are the two groups in verse 1?
There was that 1/3 of it.
A or B?
In the ancient Israel and New Testament.
Yep. So that's what we did here. We said in verse 2, there's two groups. It says, for unto us was the gospel, that's B, as well as unto them, A. We all agreed with that. So who is it in verse 1? B and B. They're both B. And these are the good ones, and these are the bad ones. And the target audience is are we okay with that? Also, audience. Everybody can see what Lily saw? That verse 1 is B, but there's two groups in verse B because it says, let us therefore fear, so there should be a fear amongst us, lest the promise being left us, B, of entering into the rest, any of you or any of us, that means there's two groups, should come short of it. So there's a potential of becoming bad. And he says it in a very nice way. So there's good and bad in B. So we've got now two proof texts.
So the Parminder, you can derive that from the Venn diagram, because there is two groups in B, the one in the shaded area and the one in the in the non-shaded area. And there is also two groups in A, the ones in the shaded area and the ones in the non-shaded area.
And the ones in the shaded area in A, did they accept the gospel?
Yes. They hear and accept, but then they go back. They apostatize.
When they accepted the gospel, they would be in B, not A.
Yes, they are in B too.
So the people who are in B, these bad ones here that I've just underlined here, these, are they A?
They used to be in A, but now they are in B.
This one
Fully.
here, are these ones A?
I don't see where you pointing to.
You can see I'm just here. I'm under. Are these A?
Eso estaba.
Are these A?
Where is you, where you pointing to the underline?
Yes.
No, those are B. That's
Did
the
they-
white area.
They used to
B.
be A.
They used to be A. All of
So
them.
they're both-
All of them used to be A,
Yeah.
but now they're in B. They are converted. They are in the new covenant.
Tyler.
I think to make the Venn diagram example work, you would have to gray out all of A and then that little bit of part of B that is represented as the bad part of B. So really, I don't know if it would be a Venn diagram at that point, but you would have to do all of A would have to be part of it. It would have to be gray.
That's what I'm struggling with. I don't think they're overlapping in the way. But I want to go to Hebrews 3. Maybe. Okay. Hebrews 3, verse 1. Let's see if this one is. Wherefore, holy members, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Jesus Christ. So that language there, is that to A or to B? Or both?
It would have to be A. Sorry, B, not A.
A, B, and both.
B.
Oh, I panicked there for a minute, Olivia. Okay.
No, B.
B, yeah. Yeah, we had to have a little bit of leveling. Why both?
I would say it's A, consider, that word consider. I just, maybe, that are rejecting. I'm going for A.
We're for holy members. Yeah. Ancient Israel, the holy members.
No.
Partakers of the heavenly calling.
Those that are called.
Yeah, so those that are called, that wouldn't be A, I don't think.
B.
Yeah. Consider Jesus. It says, consider the apostle of our profession. The high priest of our profession. I never professed that. So I think this is another one. So we found 3 today. Verse 6, but Christ as a son over his own house, whose house we are, if we hold fast the confidence and rejoicing of the hope firm until the end. Tyler.
Just a little bit of a systemic question. And I just don't know off the top of my head. Are there any gospels, or it's not gospels, sorry, were there any epistles that were written to non-believers?
No, as far as I'm aware, except I'm gonna say except this one, but this one doesn't tell you it's a specific church, so we don't know who it's written to, and so when I asked the question, all Adventists know that this is to the New Testament church, and I asked for proof text to show us that, and all the proof text that we were seeing, I was making the point that you could say all of those verses can also apply to ancient Israel. You could make an application.
Good proof text in the.
Basically, yes.
You wanted better ones.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we were struggling yesterday. It was the first time that we were doing it, and now we've had time to look at it. We've come up with at least 3 good ones, and I think verse 6 is another one
Can I ask a question
Yes.
on verse 6? Does that show that it's conditional?
Let me do verse 6 first, and if it's about verse 6, because maybe I
Okay.
got it wrong. But
Okay.
Christ, as a son over his own house, probably looking at verse 6 on its own, it doesn't make sense because he's going to compare it to Moses. There's a house, it's the same house. This house is God's church, and there are two people who are in charge or looking after the house. One of them is Moses, and one of them is Jesus. Moses is a servant who looks after the house and does a really excellent job. He's super faithful, he's really brilliant. And it says, if he was that good, what about the owner of the house? Wouldn't the owner of a house be even better? So that's the context. But Christ, as a son over his own house, whose house we are, if we hold fast the confidence and rejoicing of the hope firm unto the end. So we're part of the house if we hold on to the faith right to the very end. And your question is, Elaine?
In verse 6, is it conditional? It's the one group, B, but says if we hold fast. Is that making it conditional?
Yes. It makes it conditional that otherwise you end up becoming an adversary. And again, we actually, I think we spoke about this off recording. When it says we, Paul often uses the term we and us in this kind of all-inclusive way, but he really means you, and he's pointing the finger at the bad people. Because in Hebrews 10, in Hebrews 13, he says, I'm going to visit you. Sometimes you'll say you, but then other times you'll say we. So the we is in a generic sense. I don't think he's holding himself in that. He'll say theoretically if I hold fast, but Paul is holding fast at the moment. So if you hold fast to the end, then everything works out okay.
He did mention.
While you're on that point,
Oh, I did. Sorry, who was that?
is Victoria. While you're on that point, all the Parminder, just going back to Hebrews 13:23. I think I did.
Let me stop you for a minute. Could you start again? The sound wasn't very good. It's just got a lot better. Could you start again?
Yeah, just on that point of Hebrews 13:23. I think I read wrong because I know earlier I said like I was focusing on if come shortly or something along that lines. And I think I'm now seeing it as if he would Paul would have gone regardless if Timothy came or not, would Paul would have gone. I'm just wanting to know if I read the verse correctly. So.
I think that would be a more accurate reading that Paul's going to do something, and if Timothy comes quickly, they'll go together. Mm-hmm. That's what you just said, yes?
Yes, but if not, he's just going to go by himself, right?
Yes.
Okay, go. Okay.
So we did verses 1, we did verses 6, and I just want to go to verse 14, and we'll stop here.
Sorry, Ella Parminder.
Go ahead.
But I believe that Hebrews 3 verse 6 is similar to Hebrews 2 verse 1 as well.
Yes, that's why I kind of put them together.
Yes, that's my thought. Those are the texts that I was talking last night. Reading over, so you're going over the very evidences for me as I was reading those texts in 2, 3 that were making reference to Group B.
And the reason I put them together is because verse 1 and verse 6 bookend this story about Moses, about the house. And I'll just do one more, which is verse 14. For we are made partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast unto the end. So that's similar to the condition in verse 6, as you can see, it says, firm unto the end, and it has steadfast unto the end. So you can see it's very similar, but it's talking about a group of people that have a beginning and have an end, and the beginning is positive. the beginning of our confidence, and all you need to do is hold out to the end. And the only group I think that is referring to is B as well. So again, all of these verses, I think, do this. Two groups, they're all B's, and there's good and bad. And then when we go to chapter 5 and chapter 6, it makes much more sense about who's being spoken of, the job that they're supposed to do, and the failure that they've entered into. So we've run out of time. So whenever we meet together online, I guess it will be online now, maybe I'll tie up this a bit together, so it's all kind of wrapped up. And then as we move forward into chapter 8, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank you all for having me here. It's been, I know for some of us it's been tiring, 3 weeks back to back. It's been a lot of work. We've covered a lot of material, and I've really enjoyed myself. I hope to come back soon. Thank you.
Me too.
Let's close with a word of prayer. Dear Holy God, I want to thank you for the privilege of being able to be here amongst my friends, with my family. It's beautiful that we can spend time together, especially on the Sabbath, opening and studying your word. When we began this discussion, I thought I knew more than I really did. I had a few wobbles along the way, thinking that I'm not sure if I'm ever going to have a good understanding of what's going on. And as has happened so many times in the past, when we come together and we push in the same direction, we open ourselves up to talking about how we view things, how we feel, willing to make mistakes. You seem to catch these special moments, bring them together, and bless your people. I want to thank you that I've been blessed, that we've been able to come to a conclusion in many of the questions that we were asking of ourselves, that we have stayed on the narrow path, and that we can all have a sense that you have guided and directed us, that we have grown and learned together. All these things are a blessing that you bring to us at prayer meetings, at Vespers, and particularly on the Holy Sabbath. Keep us safe, keep us hopeful and joyful until we meet again. In Jesus' name, amen.
Man.
Yeah.